Thanks everyone for watching another episode of me streaming slash YouTube vlogging about issues relating to public transportation. Now, a couple months ago, I was talking about the thing that I actually get paid to do, which is construction costs and comparisons between them for different, let's say, for public transportation, mainly subways in different cities in the world. In case you're unfamiliar, this is what I do for a living in the Transit Costs project. And I heartily recommend that people who have not already done so go there and gaze at the database. So because of that work, I was invited to sit on a panel alongside my Transit Costs project co-lead, Eric Goldwyn, a panel by one of our, I guess, competitors, colleagues, something. They're called NO. And I sincerely hope that this link is not going to get this bombed. So anyway, it's these people. It's an institute slash think tank in Washington D.C. that has a history, unlike Eric and me. I don't actually know when they're about. Maybe they will say when they were founded. They existed many years ago already. In fact, one of my early blog posts slagged upon. Oh, okay, 1921. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So this is a 100-year-old think tank. That in the last couple years studied this issue, and I suspect there is a universe in which I would have worked for them. Like I think they were hiring not quite when I was looking for work before I ended up doing other things and getting the NYU gig. But this is a report that, again, I can see a universe in which I would have been one of the authors of that report. But anyway, it's a really good report that they've done on construction costs that I will see if I can get. It's this one. So this is the NO report, NO. And they did a symposium on this, and they did a bunch of panels, some good, some not so good. And I will say, by the way, that when their researchers were speaking, so these are Brian, Romick, and Paul, and Robert. It's just that he's more supervisory, so he wasn't talking about about the weird details of everything. But when these people were speaking generally, it was interesting. And anyway, so one of the panels featured, among other people, myself and Eric Goldwyn. It also featured Laura Tolkoff, who is Yeah, no, I did not. I do not mute myself on purpose. I mute myself because my computer decides to go on. The reason my computer goes on strike is that it recognizes that it is being treated poorly. To wit, it is more than 5 years old and it is not going to kindergarten. And if for some reason I can't get a decent new computer by the summer, it will protest that I'm not sending it to school. It's getting into child labor territory at any rate. So Ethan Elkind, Laura Tolkoff. By the way, Ethan's project is is another cost comparison that is not yet out, but is very close to being out. I'm not going to talk about this in public yet. I will say that I've read a draft, and it has a lot of interesting things specific to California. Um, but um, but anyway, it's going to be out very soon, so we can talk about it then. Laura's project, it's per. I don't think there's anything out yet, but the five of us, that is Eric, me, Ethan, and Laura, and I just realized that I named four people to you, not five. The fifth on the panel was Ramek. And so we have been talking about our different projects about construction costs, because it's four different projects studying the same issue from different angles. So to start off conversation, Robert sent a list of questions. This is the list of questions. Now, you might note that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, even skipping Berkeley, 7, 8, 9. So 10 different points, of which one was deliberately not asked of me. These are not simple yes/no questions like what is your favorite color, what city you were born in, what was the name of your childhood pet, and what are the last four digits of your tax ID number. No, these are complex questions. You can probably guess that even ignoring Eno, even though they did also answer questions, even if you turn Eric and me into one person, asking these questions of three different people is going to take a lot more than an hour. So, as you can guess, we had it. So I think our panel discussion was very good, for the record. And I don't just mean that my part or Eric's part was good. Again, I genuinely think highly of Ethan, and I think highly of Laura, and I think highly of the people that I've been in contact with. So again, that's mostly Romik, but also Brian and Paul and Robert. So no, it was just it was a good freewheeling discussion, but also we could not get any of these, or we could get some of these. We could not get all of these. So this is me taking as much time as I need. I expect this will take another hour, hour and a half. For some reason, you notice that the strike. Hang on, let me switch to the sound. You might have noticed that the strike happens specifically when I get this thing on my screen saying that there's something wrong with my color scheme. I have no idea why it's doing that. Like there is a thing, or sometimes the computer decides to take over the hardware or something, and I guess then it tries to hog the audio. I have no idea why it's doing that. Yes, I'm still using Windows 7. Is my laptop getting very warm? No, my laptop is not getting very warm. My laptop is normal temperature. I mean, it's getting a little warm, but not very warm. Like when I watch videos on YouTube, it's getting warmer. Anyway, so point is, I'm gonna take as much time as I think we need. I'm guessing it's gonna be another hour, just me. If you're watching, so this is your time limit. If you're watching this on Zoom, if you're watching this on YouTube, you are gonna see below how long this video is, and remember that this is 10 minutes into the video, to the recorded video that is. So let's see. So we envision a robust, candid conversation. Yeah, this definitely happened. Yes, okay, this is also a statement of principle, not a question. Okay, let's not do gotchas. Yep, very good. And I want to point something out. I mean, there are gotchas that you can do in reports, there are gotchas that you can do, I mean, in our work. It's just that people who know what they're doing don't do that. Like, so let's look at the questions below. So this is going to be a very broad question. It's the first actual question. So what are my key takeaways? So I'm gonna turn this into a different. So okay, what are my key takeaways on the extent of they mean the United States cost premium and the key cost drivers? So let's see. I'm gonna divide this into New York and not New York because, as you might note from the database, which I don't know if it's in order or anything like that, but you might point out view and download our data. So something important about the database is that you might notice that New York has the worst costs by far. In an early stage of the database, it already had hundreds of entries, and the five most expensive were exactly the five that are in New York City, counting gateways New York City. I think it's been interpolated with maybe two more things. I think a short thing in Hong Kong, maybe a short thing in Singapore, are now numbers 5 and 6 or something like that. But New York is just far, far, far more expensive than not New York. Things that are not New York can be horrendous, like West Seattle and Ballard is a veritable shit show. Hart. Wait. No, right. Of course, it's not Hart. This is Hart. This is $300 million. 300 million per kilometer may not sound like a lot, but this is an entirely elevated line. So obviously there are things that are less bad than these. So things like Crenshaw, but these are also things that are smaller, like the Crenshaw line, the parts that are not above ground, that are not underground are at grade for the most part. It's light rail. The Silver line is entirely at grade with a small proportion of tunnel. So so these are not good numbers representing for what they're doing. And yet there are three numbers here to the left of the decimal dot, and you can figure out which one is New York because it's going to have four. Not this. This is the one that interpolated. It's the Hong Kong one, I think. Yep. Dongcheng. This one is also four, but actually behind New York. Okay, some of the numbers are incomplete. But only a handful. Yep, these four. Okay, I hope that when I click keep color scheme, it told my laptop to shut the hell up, but we will see. Anyway, these are the five New York projects. Three figures, four figures, and it's on three figures of which the first is an 8. It's 1, 3. The 8 here is Crossrail. Two figures. New York has a true cost premium above the rest of the US. So let's discuss New York problems and the rest of US problems because, again, they're not the same. So the so let's see. Labor is specifically a New York problem. So this means both elevated wages and elevated staffing levels coming from very specific union issues that exist in New York, barely in the rest of the northeastern U.S., not anywhere else in the country. So the United States does not have a problem of high blue-collar wages, quite to the contrary. And this is not even a public versus private sector or union versus non-union. The entry-level bus driver wages in, I think, Portland, I think were something like $16 an hour. They rise within a few years pretty quickly, but when you're starting to work as a bus driver in Portland, they believe you're being paid $16 an hour, maybe $18 an hour. And to put things in perspective, in Berlin, riding a bike for Lieferando or Volt, like the delivery companies, you get 16 euros an hour. And that is a job that is the most casualized thing ever. And it's also probably physically better to do than driving a bus because you get so it's not physically very arduous. I mean, it's physical labor, but you're riding a bike and you're not lifting heavy things. But whereas with driving a bus, all the problems on the road, every little pothole gets transmitted right up the edges because of the size of the buses. So people sitting in the very back get a jolt in the back, and the person sitting in the front, aka the bus driver, gets a jolt. The back pain levels for bus drivers are very bad. And you don't get it while riding a bike, and conversely, also don't get any physical exercise. So it's worst of both worlds. And you get paid less than not driving than riding a bike, doing delivery in Berlin. Berlin is not a richer city than Portland. So there's no problem again of high blue collar wages. In construction, there is to some extent, but it's something very specific to to not even all public sector unions in New York, but something very specific to the trades in New York, and the sandhogs are especially bad. So don't generalize this about everything, but this is a problem in New York. There's a procurement problem, which is partly New York, partly rest of the US. I was told that in New York, procurement costs double. So procurement problems double the price of everything. And I was told specific things to New York, but also some of these have analogs that are almost as bad or bad in a different way in other parts of the US. I've heard it called the T factor, the sound transit factor, or the MTA factor. Dealing with these agencies is a nightmare. Contractors always know that things are going to cost more because of some agency micromanagement bullshit, because of some political interference, because the agency just takes a year of paperwork to do what normal people take a week to do. And the result is that they need to bid higher. Plus issues of risk mitigation, plus reforms that end up causing more problems than they solve. And New York maybe evolves differently from, let's say, California, but the procurement issues are pretty bad both places. So there's a procurement problem. There's a New York specific labor problem, which can vanish even when it's the same city agency as long as it's building tunnels outside the city. There are problems with utilities, but it's not that the physical utilities are a problem. There are I mean, people here don't live in huts. People in Madrid, where the construction costs are something like 1/3 what they are here, maybe less, don't live in huts either. We have utilities too, thank you very much. It's just that sometimes there's just better work on mapping them. Sometimes there isn't, but there's a way to get the agencies to coordinate. So if you're building a subway, there's going to be some kind of coordination with the electric utility that's going to help you find the utilities and answer your questions, and not demand that you randomly give them an upgrade to their wires paid at someone else's expense. And so with the utilities, again, it's not a problem with actual utilities. A lot of this is the only thing to fear is fear itself. This is a serious problem with American infrastructure construction. There's a lot of stuff that's defensive against dealing with utilities, even if if the cost of, let's say, deep boring is more than the cost of dealing with the utilities. And again, it's a pan-American problem. So everyone says New York is so old. I've heard this in San Jose. I've heard this as an excuse to build deep tunnels with in-tunnel platforms in downtown San Jose. So we said New York specific labor, procurement. Procurement is probably the biggest single item. Utilities, or more precisely, fear thereof. Um, Random drift. There's just not a lot of course correction. If the United States sucks at something other people get right, well, um, did you notice the United States, let's say, pass mandatory vaccination laws like France? No, it didn't. And I don't think anything in Northern Europe did either, because people here think that France is a nation of lazy rioters and Italy is a nation of lazy, unemployed people who take EU money, and the idea that they do things right doesn't quite sit straight with Germans, who therefore skip on copying anything that actually works from France or from Italy or from Spain. So they have higher vaccination rates than we are, and at this point they have less corona. Um, so here are vaccination rates, and bear in mind, more people died of corona in Southern Europe and in France than did here. Um, in France, it's because they didn't lock down when they needed to, and this is the second time, and in Southern Europe, but in Southern Europe, they just have very high levels of overcrowding. They're poorer, so people stay with their parents until they're 30, which is less common here and unheard of in Scandinavia. And of course, the Nordic countries had very low death rates from corona, except for Sweden, which decided to give everyone corona. So this is Portugal, 88%. Spain is 81%. Italy, 77%. France, 75%. And it was kind of bringing up the rear until mandatory vaccinations. We're 68%. We're not actually doing well. We're almost like the America of Europe at this point. And so in the same way, America don't learn from anyone else. And there's this kind of clinging. There's always this kind of excuse mongering culture of you cling to your own successes. So in the spring of 2021, there was this mentality that, oh, the United States maybe didn't do well early on, but it was the world's best place for dealing with diseases because the vaccines were invented there, because Pfizer is an American company. I've literally never heard an American say, yes, Moderna is American, but BioNTech is German, so it was a shared American slash Northern European thing. No, it's always called Pfizer there, and the United States has better vaccination than Europe. And look at this table again. This is the U.S. Worse than we are. No, yeah, worse than we are, and we are among the worst in Western Europe. And so I bring this up because this means that even if you have random drift or engineering methods, if there's something that Germany does better than Italy, Italy will learn from Germany. And if there's something Italy does better than Germany, the Germany will not learn from Italy. And again, the US will learn from nobody. New York will not even learn from other American cities. So this is a big reason why things drift this way. I'm sure there are some unique Texas problems, just there are unique New York problems with labor, but Texas is very proud, but it's not so proud that if it builds something for twice the cost of the rest of America, it will not learn. Um, and even if it's something that might offend people's political sensibilities, the way busting the Sandhawks union is gonna offend New Yorkers' left-wing sensibilities. And I'm not comparing New York's costs predominantly with Texas, because Texas mostly doesn't build subways. I'm comparing it with California and Washington and the other Washington and maybe Boston and Portland and Hawaii. So there's just this inertia coming from like the belief that you're on top of the world. That's kind of the thing that knits everything together, like how the US drifted to this, how special things about Italy, like their corruption levels, end up getting leveled. And similar problems in the United States lead to defenses of the system as America is the best nation in the world, blah, blah, blah. And so, and this is how you get things like procurement being broken to the point that people don't even know how procurement works in other places. And then you have problems, and again, so it's the labor issue, we said, procurement, utilities and fear thereof, poor interagency coordination, which is partly a matter of utilities, but it's also a separate tab, especially for anything touching commuter rail. That's going to be insanely expensive. And this is part of the problem, I think, with the Green Line extension that we studied in one of our cases, because that was so let me show you a map of the Green Line extension. I think we might have actually have it here. I never remember what is projects. Yes. Yeah, it's going to be under cases, but I don't think, but the case is going to be a write-up. So this is just a map. And the text does not, the text is not very mappy. So the case report is very prosaic. So I might need to do it via cities, but the point, actually, it might actually be just easier to show it on Google Earth because there's a specific, so because this is a project that's mostly designed for metros and the mapping is metrocentric, it's not showing, it might not easily show a fundamental part of GLX being a mistake from day one. Namely, you look at where the right-of-way was done. So the Green Line extension, for those who do not know, starts from the end of the Green Line here. It's called Lechmere. And then they go whip to Tufts, with a branch here to Union Square. This is along railroad rights of way. So there are two commuter rail tracks here. The light rail is not using them because it's considered a different mode of transportation. So they widen. So the bulk of the civils for the project were to widen the trench a little bit and to modify all these road overpasses to permit four tracks, two for commuter rail, two for light rail, rather than maybe adding more commuter rail stations in the city and actually running commuter rail as urban service. So anything that touches commuter rail will just suck in the United States. It's a high capacity tram. I mean, what do you mean high capacity tram, not a metro? It's underground. It is. I think it might be called a pre. I do not actually know how it is called in the Netherlands. I never remember. In Belgium, it would be called pre-metro because the Green Line, at the southern, I guess, western and southwestern end, goes into tramway mode, and then it enters, and then it goes into tunnel. So it's like a Stadtbahn system. So in Germany, it is called a Stadtbahn, except that the Green Line opened 1898, and I believe our first Stadtbahn opened in the 1960s. Yeah, old branch. No, three branches have street running. A fourth branch, which is called the D branch, is entirely separated, but still runs the same vehicles. And I think also might have at grade crossings with gates, but certainly does not have street running. But yeah, it's a tramway that is being put underground, hence Stadtbahn. But the point is that they took this Stadtbahn, and first of all, they extend the Stadtbahn parallel to a rail right of way, where it should have been commuter rail. But the main point is that there's no coordination between even different parts of the same agency. And when things touch commuter rail, there's just this mentality that commuter rail is not mass transit, it's commuter rail. It is something that was literally said by MBTA general manager Frank de Paula years ago, maybe in 2014, 2015. So we've covered what? New York specific labor, procurement, which I again believe is the biggest issue, utilities and fear thereof, interagency coordination. Things with commuter rail have an extra tab on them because even subject to all of these, things get worse because of agency insularity problems, even beyond the normal American level. And the state of project management is often not very good, which tends to bleed into procurement problems. The techniques used are often bad for defensive reasons, so defensive against community complaints. There's this idea that I did not use the word vitocracy, mostly because I don't like putting the word cressy next to things, but I agree with that sentiment. I think it was, I'm forgetting who else it was on the panel who brought up that word. That the United States has a system of government based on veto points rather than based on denial of majority. So the way Germany achieves limited government, or really any modern, I want to say non-English speaking, but let's stick for a sec with non-English speaking, but it's not completely accurate. But the way every modern non-English speaking democracy achieves limited government is by something called denial of majority, which is a nice way of saying nobody's going to have a majority. You can have very expansive ideas about how to remake Germany in your image, but your party has 25% of the vote. Even if you pretend that the Green Party is the same as the SPD, which it's very similar to it on policy matters, but but procedurally sufficiently different that SPD cannot use it to just do an auto coup or something. Even then, there's no majority. I mean, you need either the communists who are anti-regime and might grudgingly support SPD and the Green on stuff like the minimum wage, but not. And at this point, even that doesn't have a majority, so you need Red Green and the liberals who want fiscal austerity and not so fast decarbonization. So so the ability to just run away and run like an urbanist government is limited by denial of majority, and this is also how Hungary worked. Like the reason Orban was able to do what he did is that for a random reason he managed to get a super majority and then rewrote the constitution. So the way the United States works is it does not do that. The United States has majorities everywhere and no norms. Britain has majorities but very strong norms that are, I think, slowly being eroded, but still. The United States has majorities, no norms essentially. I mean, the only norms are to slow things down. There are no norms about how to govern, about how not to govern. So instead, they just pile on the veto points. So they make any kind of change impossible, and this is at every level, because often because dysfunction at the top inspires dysfunction at the bottom. And so there's a million veto points, and all of these are informal at the low level. So, I mean, Biden can't pass laws and say, I'm going to have the sergeant in arms detain 10 Republican senators so that we will have a majority. But a state government absolutely can say, we're not going to have the NIMBYs in the loop. But they often elect not to, often because of timidity. I mean, when they actually try it, it turns out to work and it's a crowd booster. It's just that they're timid. People who are driven and ambitious and forward thinking don't go into the public sector in the United States, especially not to politics. Why would they? I mean, to go to politics, you probably need to have, like, be a dynast of some sort, like Andrew Cuomo. So it kind of encourage. So it's kind of, so there's kind of rule-be mediocre people, and the actual experts are basically never listened to. There's this mentality that the engineer works for the generic manager, the generalist manager. This is not how most of the developed world outside the Anglosphere works. Here, the engineer is rather prestigious. In Southern Europe, the engineer is very prestigious, and will get listened to as an expert professional. So this is how construction there is more, and to some extent here, is more about actual engineering techniques, not about how to anticipate what people might complain about, where people means 60-year-old retired bankers on the Upper East Side who have opinions. So anyway, that's the main. So anyway, that's the main takeaways. It's, as I said, it's New York specific. I think it's labor. Then biggest, most nationally important is procurement, is broken procurement, utilities, or rather fear thereof, poor interagency coordination, poor coordination whenever you touch commuter rail, drift leading to not realigning practice with best practices, imagined vetocracy, i.e. there's an actual federal vetocracy and it pretends there is, and there's a pretense that there is at the local level, and low quality top leadership. And again, I can weight these different things. I said procurement adds about a factor of 2. It's probably the biggest. So now that was the first question. Let's do the second one now. Why is okay? So they're asking about the scope. Okay. So the general scope is our project is mixed methods. So the quantitative bit is trying to be comprehensive, not quite, especially because at this point, there because at this point there's not a good mechanism. I mean, if you email, I will say, if you email us a project and its cost, it will be read. But we're going to find time, which I hope is going to be at the beginning of 2022, to do a big update, and then do 6 cases if we have more. I mean, we're getting more money, but I don't know if it's going to be enough to not just study high-speed rail, but also do more cases. I would love to do more cases, by the way, which I'm not going to write myself. So if you're, for example, interested in doing a specific case that is not among our 6, please email us, and we might be doing more cases. I don't know. So the one that's done is Boston, Istanbul, and Milan. And we call it Milan because it was supposed to be Milan, but it's sprawled to be Milan, Rome, and Turin, all in one case because it's the same Italian institution. Oh, I am writing cases. I am writing the. I am juggling New York, Stockholm, and London. No, and I co-wrote Boston. No, the reason I'm not writing new cases is that, first of all, my ability to work in countries where the main language is not English is limited. I do it in Stockholm because everyone there speaks English. But also we're moving. I'm moving on to high speed. Most of us are moving on to high speed rail. But again, if you'd like to add things if there are things you think you can add to the database or more cases, write us. We don't have a big "we're hiring" sign, but given a sufficiently interesting proposal, we're hiring. And so anyway, but we have these 6 cases, and as I said, 1 is out, 2 very close to being out. New York, probably 2 more months of that. London and Stockholm, we haven't interviewed enough people. We are interviewing more people. Should be out in 3-4 months, I'm guessing. So that's roughly our timeline, and the stuff that knits everything together is going to be out probably simultaneously with the last case, because the biggest comparison things are already written. Like, I don't need to interview 40 people in Stockholm to write a conclusion that incorporates Stockholm. I need to interview 30 people, maybe not even 40 to write Stockholm. I need to interview 20, 30 people in Stockholm to write a Stockholm case. I do, but having interviewed something like 8, I know enough about Stockholm to do something very generic about it, like a couple pages that incorporate lessons for other places. So that's the scope and the bounds. And I will point out something, that all of these 6 studies are special. None of them is average. The average city is called the average city exists. It is called Paris. Has anything been written about Parisian construction costs? Yes, a ton. I mean, Grand Paris Express is a 30-something depending on your billion-euro project, of course, much will have been written on it. And remember, I read French, so I've read what's been written about it and its cost overruns and its management problems. Not very much in a comparative sense, because if you're French and you're trying to study the problems of Paris, you don't care that with all these cost overruns, the construction cost per kilometer in Paris is 1/8 that of New York. You don't care. You're not trying to beat New York. You're trying to build metros in Paris. And unfortunately, France doesn't have quite the pride problems of Northern Europe, but it has enough that it will not just instinctively compare itself with Spain. So again, a lot has been written in Paris. Can it be compared? Absolutely. This is a case that we probably would like to do, given more funding. Or again, or given or given a good case. I mean, we will see. As I said, if you can write a case, if you think you can write a case, email us. We will talk. So something very generic like Paris, Tokyo, Berlin. These are the three main medium cost ones I want to study. Taipei would be fascinating. So there are lots of cases that are. So Taipei, by the way, is very unusual. Taipei is a very high cost city. So note that there's nothing here that's not Western. And for the record, Istanbul, when it comes to infrastructure, is a Southern European city. Um, um, Not because I think there's going to be a big difference between East Asia and Europe, but because at least at the level of cost, there isn't one, and they want to see if there are actual differences that cancel out or something, because I know that the ideas of how to build subways in East Asia are different from what they are here. For example, the stations are much more massive. Even in South Korea, where the construction costs are low. So that would be an interesting addition. Uh, what else? Doing cases in developing countries. I know that I talked about this with Charter Cities International, and they seem to be sold on the idea of doing cases in middle-income countries. I'm forgetting which ones. For the record, Turkey, not meaningfully middle income, not anymore. So let's compare Turkey with a couple European peers and with China. So first of all, Turkey is richer than Greece as of recently. And yes, it is a Corona artifact, but they were pretty close before Corona. Is Turkey poorer than Italy? Yes, it absolutely is. Turkey looks up to Italy, not down on Italy, but the difference is smaller than with China. So, and again, it's not just a Corona artifact. Like the absolute difference is a Corona artifact, but not the relative one. So Turkey is an upper middle income country. It's not a developing country. I mean, it's a very fast growing country, especially with things involving construction, but not the same thing as China. So it's kind of like stuff that's just outside its scope that I would like to look at in the future. So Spur Berkeley. Um, so these are questions about NEPA. NEPA is National Environmental Protection Act. CEQA is California Environmental Quality Act. NEPA is a paperwork act which says that agencies are required to do paperwork on all environmental impact. Nothing else is required, but if there's something that you missed, for example, if the line width is misleading, then you can be sued. So it's entirely a way of creating surface area for people to sue, nothing more, nothing less. CEQA requires actually mitigating all of those things, but it is largely also just surface area for people to sue over. And again, that's not us. I mean, we're not doing California cases. Um, let's talk about limitations. So as I said, we don't have all the cases that we would like to do, but that is not about data. So this is about information costs slash timeline. Um, so getting information in languages other than English is not the easiest. Now, if it's languages that they speak, like French, it's fine. If it's languages that they can pretend to speak, like German and Spanish, that's also fine. But we actually have pretty big lacunae in the database in places where you're just not going to use English. So in China, we have some gaps. We hired a grad student to write the Chinese data, which was very helpful, but there's been more since. Likewise, for the Arab world, Russia has a lot of gaps, and I'm pretty sure that I'm relying on not completely correct data from whatever I can find that's maybe in Russian but is linked to in English. Like, if I can find the actual article, it does not matter what language it is in because nearly all languages are machine translatable. For the record, my native language, Hebrew, is one of the exceptions. Machine translation sucks for Hebrew, and I have never attempted it for Arabic as a result. But like Chinese actually is very good for machine translation. The Chinese grammar is incredibly easy. I think Korean and Japanese also, judging by the output at least, and judging by the fact that Japanese rail fans don't yell at me, but actually searching is not the easiest. So there are some Korean gaps. I don't think we have data for or match data for Korea outside Seoul. So places like that, it's mostly places where you need to pay someone or just know the languages. Um, and these are naturally also going to be the most interesting places because the places that don't work in English are the places that are likely to work in the most different way from places that use English speaking consultants. Like Singapore has obvious Japanese influences, but the contracting there is I do not actually know how the contracting compares with Japan because I don't know how contracting works in Japan, but I do know how contracting works in South Korea, and it's completely different from Singapore. Or design works completely different from Singapore. And yeah, it matters that South Korea has not yet undergone the. I wouldn't say has not undergone the Anglicization of Singapore, but I mean Sweden is perfectly fluently English. It's like Singapore that way. It's just that Sweden doesn't culturally cringe toward Britain, the US, and Singapore very much does. So anyway, so anyway, these are the main recommendations if you're trying to do any kind of comparative work involving places that are not English speaking and are not Europe. Get people who speak the language. What are some of the lingering questions or areas for future study that your teams have flagged? Thank you for requiring me to do this delete and then carriage return again. Open office, I love you. What are some of the lingering questions? First of all, just things, what exactly is going on with medium cost environments? So not Italy or the Nordic countries or Turkey, but Germany, Japan, France, China. Is it like, are they all, is it this weird thing where medium cost countries, it's going to be medium cost in a different way, maybe? Like maybe they mix and match good and bad aspects, but they have different ones, is what I'm guessing is going to happen, but I only know in the vaguest outline regarding Germany and France and not at all about China and Japan. And so that's a big one. Or how does it work for things that are not mega projects? Subways are always mega projects. Okay, subway of let's say 100 million euros is still a mega project because if you're building a subway for 100 million euros, let's say it's a one station extension in a low cost country, then you're probably a small country like Sweden, or you're a poor country like Spain. I mean, relatively poor, or you're a poor and small country like Portugal or Greece. So 100 million to you is a lot. And if it is not a lot, and if you're a bigger country, even Spain. I mean, Spain does not have 100 million euro extensions. Why would it do that? It can do bigger extensions, right? I mean, if you can afford bigger, I mean, the thing is that there's so much demand for this that they. Let me see what I have here for. Nope, it's not going to be 5, maybe 4. Madrid. Please tell me you're going to get me a table. It's not going to make me query individual. Yeah. So this is, by the way, cost per kilometer. So these are the more recent lines. I mean, if you're Madrid, you're absolutely like spending €1 billion on this, or a couple hundred million euros on in each of several things at once, because you can afford to. So then the combo of subway lines becomes a mega project. And the point is that, what about things that are not mega projects? What if it's just extending the tramway 2 stops for 30 million euros? Are the rules the same? Can you even get the cost accurately without dealing with a battery of betterments? Which is a big problem. In the United States has, that maybe I should have mentioned before. The United States has this problem with something called betterments or extras. Betterments is the formal term where, where they're bundling the project with other things, and the other things are going to be incredibly expensive because they're being paid by the transit agency or federal funding or whatever. So people demand a bike lane for $100 million over 3 kilometers, as a community betterment as part of the light rail project. And then they threatened that without this, the light rail project would not have happened, except that now it's happening without the bike lane, because the bike lane is being descoped due to severe costs. And being able to say no to people, it's related to being able to say no to people, including people who view themselves as very moral stalwarts of the community. And the upshot is that I think it also correlates with the MBSM to some extent. I mean, not perfectly, but I think it might correlate with the MBSM to some extent. And so I mean, low cost, not high cost. Again, it's not perfect. Singapore is not that NIMBY, but very high cost. But maybe Singapore is weird. But anyway, so the betterments are going to be a bigger factor for non-mega projects. For example, 1/3 of the Nice tramways costs were betterments, like tree planting, street reconstruction, public plaza reconstruction, not construction. The public plaza was not there before. And so, yes, I know it is the first time chat for me to follower. Do you know why? Because this is a spam that I never remember how to. No, I'm not going to reply to you. Oh, right, I right click this, I left click this one, and ban. If betterments are a reason for higher Japanese costs, I have no idea if Japan even has betterments. My presumption is that Japan has high costs because Japan has so austerity racked that it does not build the easy suburban extensions. It only builds the lower cost per rider, higher cost per kilometer city center segments. That's my guess. So Japan is not actually a medium cost country. It's a medium cost country netting that out. And without netting that out, it's a high cost country. But again, I don't know this. Maybe you know this and you should tell me. So anyway, the betterments are just a bigger factor for smaller things and for bigger. Yeah, I know the stations are ornate, but that's a Pan-Asian thing. That's also a thing in South Korea, for example. In fact, was criticized by one of South Korea's rag national dailies. But I repeat myself, they're all rags. I think it's this post called "Construction Costs and Perceptions." Yeah, so this is something that I saw 10 years ago already. I mean, 9. But. So let me see if Jung Ang has. Okay, okay. So Jung Ang apparently has been turned into a virus website, which I'm sure is gonna cause less damage to you than actually reading Jung Ang. In case you guys don't know, the main South Korean daily is what's called Cho Jung Dong. So it's Chosunilbo, Jung Ang, and I'm forgetting the third one. So Chosun Dong are very right wing, hackish, probably played a role in the country's inability to suppress corona because they will be against whatever the liberal president does, and then when the evangelicals refused to submit to contact tracing because they heard from Donald Trump that there's no corona. Once it got into when it was a French church, like the original thing in Daegu, they didn't care. But when it was a church that was big enough within the movement that they weren't just gonna mock them in July 2020, then they started closing ranks, and the country has corona, whereas it's rather similar island sister country to the far south with similarly polarized politics, uh, what stayed corona free, and at this point is also mostly corona free. So anyway, the point is that so let me just show you the extract. Here's Jung Ang complaining that Seoul has very ornate station, except that uh, they're much cheaper than the uh, brutalist things that just are assumed cheap are actually not cheap at all in Washington, D.C. But that's not betterment, that's architecture. In the same way that building deep underground is not betterment, it's just an architectural or an engineering choice that can suck, but is not betterment. But it is not a betterment. But anyway, yeah, the betterments are big lingering question. You're right. Japan in general, things that are not mega projects. Specific recommendations. Okay. The hell? What is this doing? Why are they like this? Like, you guys get what I'm trying to do, right? I'm trying to do a. God, fuck every single one. Oh god, and now the thing is broken. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna do it like this. No. No. It's mostly me just trying to tab so I can do ABC. That's all I'm trying to do right now. Okay. So, cues and specific recommendations. What did we discover on best practice in contracting? So here's something really important. It depends on who you ask. So it's not what my team discovered. I discovered, and this is something that Eric and I disagree on. I will tell you that design build is trash and you should not do it. Eric will tell you that design build doesn't really matter whether you do design bid or design bid build. It just matters, like, what matters is other things. Now, what I will tell you is that this is correct, but also, if you do things correctly, you do not need design build. And design build kind of tries to get you to do things incorrectly by not having a public planning team or any kind of public oversight. So agencies like it when they try to not have public oversight because they think that the civil service are a bunch of bottom feeders and everyone who's not a personal lackey of the governor or the mayor uh, should be sent to work in the mines. Um, and so there's this mentality that we keep getting from sources that design build is better when Americans who only build in America tell us that, and then it is not used anywhere cheap. And then you actually follow through an American project, and they did not get cheaper through design build. So actually, the fact that people like the important people in the industry and people with a track record in the industry keep saying wrong things, that itself I think adds another point of interest. Um, Okay, so this is two questions. So the lack of staff capacity to deliver a project is a major theme across this report. Yes, it is. So what did my team discover were the main culprits of the lack of resources capacity to deliver? The answer is people trying to people trying to privatize the state. And I'm gonna draw a distinction between privatizing services and privatizing the state. In Stockholm, they privatized the service called the T-bana. That is, there's public planning, but the T-bana, the metro in Stockholm, is operated under contract by a private corporation, namely the MTR, the one from Hong Kong. Which means, for those who are keeping track at home, that whenever you use the subway in Stockholm, Xi Jinping gets a cut. And they recently, I think pre Hong Kong, but recently did so. I mean, pre the Hong Kong protests, when the MTR seemed like a private corporation like all others. They also did the same with the commuter trains. So there's a contract. They can't control the fares or anything, so they've not deregulated the fares, which is also distinct from privatizing the state. It's a bad thing, but it is distinct from privatizing the state. Um, but all of this is within the system of public sector supervision. It's public sector planning. And what they do in the US and UK, they've convinced themselves that they should privatize basic planning to consultants. They should not have they should not have in-house capacity, because in-house capacity represents a commitment to spending money. And the idea is that you should only commit to not spending money through statutory limits on taxation, which are never going to be good. They're never going to make the government better. They're going to make it worse, because they are going to lead to off-books ways to raise money. There's, I believe, 11 different funding sources for the MTA in New York. Each time they find a different one, and it's never going to be a clean tax. It's always going to be something like a real estate transactions tax or something that's designed to be very opaque and kind of like a quiet state. So a state that nobody notices exists and therefore has no transparency. And when there's no transparency, why would things be good? I mean, things are good when there's some kind of accountability, and the result, there's no accountability. So a lot of this comes specifically from the center right, not so much Thatcher herself. I suspect it's like the post Thatcher people trying to be more reasonable and moderate, so not telling coal miners that they're going to have to find work in cleaning or something for a lot less than the wage they expect, but various two-tier structures, various ways to do hiring freezes, ways to kind of freeze the government to make it not be able to expand anymore. So you can't ever, so anything that's a commitment to doing things, like hiring in the public sector, is not being done. And that is the problem. In Massachusetts, Governor Charlie Baker is a villain whenever it comes to governance and infrastructure, going back 30 years to when he was Governor Weld's budget director. And now he's refusing to invest in important things for Massachusetts infrastructure like regional rail electrification, which he sandbags because he figures that uh, the problems of not building things are not going to be as visible as the problems of building things and failing. So you want a culprit? We have the case. The case is a culprit. He is currently sitting at the governor's mansion. And finally, uh, and it's not just him as a person in the same way that Andrew Cuomo, I mean, politically is a generic liberal Democrat, but it's not a failure of generic liberal Democrats. It's a failure of finance, a failure of pettiness. But it's not something that you get someone with a different ideology. You get better institutions that produce better politicians, but politicians with the same, even sometimes in the same state with the same ideology, like Senator Gillibrand, this one, Gilly or Jilly, Gillibrand. Yeah, so this one, she's a boomer. I mean, Gen X boomer, but still a boomer, and she's actually good. And again, ideologically similar to Cuomo. Just they yeeted her into the Senate and then refused to give her anything bigger because of a bad party institution. The distinction is that Charlie Baker is not a bad. I mean, he's a bad person, but it's a bad ideology. It's like a typical representative of an ideology that has failed, and that is absolutely a culprit. Now, what recommendations for bolstering public sector management capacity? Hire more people, hire more planners, hire more dispatchers, and pay them like professional human beings. I mean, the entry level salaries for planners. I mean, so in New York, so I talked before about the $16 an hour. Again, 1 6, not 60. For starting bus drivers in Portland. No wonder there's a shortage of bus drivers in most of the United States. New York does not have a shortage. It pays bus drivers. I don't know what the entry level ones get paid, but I think they converge to normal. I don't actually think they're two tiered in New York, actually. So maybe it's the same thing from the start. You just have a bum schedule because seniority picks. But the average wage for a bus driver in New York is 85K. So which is actually the market rate. Uh, it's unionized, but it's market rate. And but planners don't get that. Entry level planners do not get 85K. Entry level planners, I think, start with a 5, and they tend to have a master's. So that's a hilariously low wage in New York City for someone with a college degree. Um, so to put this in perspective, you want like the higher end places that hire people with college degrees, like maybe masters professionals. Bigelow, I don't know what it pays now, but for a while it kept paying the same nominal wage year after year, letting it erode a little bit. It's just that the nominal wage in Bigelow was $160,000 a year. I met someone who a Bigelow firm, who I think graduated, forgetting where, I want to say Columbia Law. And then a big law firm was really impressed by them, and but did not have any openings for that year. So it was resolved by the firm paying this lawyer 80K to retain them for a year doing nothing. So they got paid 80K in what is essentially a 1 year unemployment pay for a promise that they would start work for that firm a year later at 160 because they were worried that another firm might snatch them in the middle. So that's Bigelow. That's unusual. But finance, I think people start 6 figures. I was told that even 10 years ago that you're 150 a couple years out of college. Tech, big tech starts you at I think 110, maybe a little more at Google. Um, Ask yourself if you want the sort of people who get work at Google or and how much you need to pay to get them. Like your call, to be honest. And this means like you need to be more demanding of your workforce, but also treat them like professionals, not treat them like dirt. And it means you paying them like professionals. It means they self-manage like professionals. Um, there's kind of weird mentality, and again, I talk about ideology a lot. So I talk about how the center right has failed. So here's a bad example of specific failure on the left. There's mentality that because inequality is growing, I mean, it's not growing. Inequality grew in the 80s, 90s. I think inequality has, in the United States has been flat since the peak of the business cycle before the Great Recession, so 2007. Um, so people say, oh, inequality is rising and the public sector protects from that, and therefore the public sector should never adopt private sector managerial changes. And in fact, the public sector management should not change in any way, shape, or form. It's turned into a kind of dogma. It was MAGA before MAGA. I mean, I literally saw the expression by left populists, not even especially Trumpy ones, just random people who wanted a higher minimum wage, talking about how they need to put America first and the inherent morality of the small town or the neighborhood and over big finance. And I mean that's a mentality, and that kind of so it's kind of an attachment to a romanticized past that needs to absolutely go. And the people who are expert in how to preserve the past are not actually experts in useful things, and their jobs need to be realigned with their lack of expertise. And um, and also it means certain HR problems need to be fixed. Public sector HR in America is terrible. It takes forever to hire someone instead of a more normal process. Um, and so the and so these are the big blocks. You need to pay the people better, but you need to pay better like it's private sector better, not reproduce public sector dysfunction. Um, so it turns out there were fewer questions than expected because some of these were statements and not questions. So there were 5 questions, 3 parts. So these are the questions. So there were fewer questions than I thought, but as I said, I said it's going to take me another hour. That was an hour and 3 minutes ago. So I sometimes can self-modulate and figure out how long things are going to take. So I'm going to open this up for questions if anyone has any question about this topic. So the UK should just give TfL the budget for a full team of project managers. I don't know yet. I don't yet know. I was not told of project management as a problem with Crossrail. Crossrail, again, so London's probably of the 6 cases, it's probably the least developed, to be honest, which is kind of funny because it's the project that had the most written about it in English of literally anything. Because it's like Grand Paris Express, but except it's one of our 6 projects and GP isn't, and also the information about Crossrail is in English. But the problems of Crossrail are different. I cannot exactly tell you what they are, but the over reliance on consultants is absolutely a thing, and there needs to be and the problem is, so I'm going to, so while we're looking for political culprits, I'm going to mention someone in Britain who is not a culprit. Given time, this person would have been a culprit, but this person did not have enough time to cause damage. This person is the previous Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Dom Cummings, replaced since by the person who was always nominally the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, but um, but for about I don't remember how long. I think it was a couple months. Dom was basically running the show. Um, so let's for a moment talk about Dom's failings, but only for a moment. So, and why people didn't recognize them. So someone like Cuomo is incompetent and probably understands that he is incompetent, or his underlings understand that they're not technically apt. They don't say we are the baddies, but they say, well, we're not. Technically, it's only for other places, but we need to make sure you don't understand our constrained political environment or something. The constrained political environment in question is that you can rape or not rape, sexually assault, what was it, 10 women, and kill several tens of thousands of people and lie about it. And only then will finally people tell you to get out of your hereditary gubernatorial seat. Um, anyway, so these people are very timid. Um, so these kind of hacks, and Cummings absolutely is a hack, tend to be timid. Why? Because the ones who are not timid, like Cummings, fail in very spectacular ways. In Dom's case, it was partly about Corona and partly about trying to reinvent the government and realizing that, and all of his reinventions suck because he as a person sucks and is incompetent. And so Dom, and I segueing into Dom because Dom had this idea of that the had actually this good idea that he could not implement. So it had this good idea that the people in charge in Britain are um, humanities grads and not science grads, and even speculated that maybe the Conservative Party could gain votes from minorities. I don't think they use the expression people of color in Britain natively. Borners, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that everyone just says BME, British Minority Ethnic. And it even speculated that because BMEs are so disproportionately doctors or BAME, what is British African or Minority Ethnic? Okay, minorities, whatever. Yeah, so Dom had this fantasy that minorities, especially the wealthier ones, so Indians and Chinese, would start voting Tory in higher numbers if they focused on prestige for doctors and engineers and tried to hire people from these backgrounds. Uh, and he actually diagnosed a serious problem in Britain and he even probably had enough self reflection to understand that he and Boris are themselves PPE grads. They are they're Oxford humanities. They're people who are like trained to be generalists. Like the specific way that Oxford humanities trains you is to be able to form an argument about everything. It's the way they lump in politics, philosophy, and economics, rather than saying these are three different fields. So you can study philosophy, and then you're gonna, study, let's say, perspectives on ancient Greek philosophy or on moral philosophy or philosophy of social sciences, like what Habermas does. Like people have these. People have all these horrific conspiracy theories about the Frankfurt School. If you actually sit down and read Jürgen Habermas, what he is a philosopher of the social sciences. He studies the logic of the social sciences and knowledge production and humanity and humanistic knowledge production. This is essentially the theory of communicative action. And at any rate, so instead of saying this is a specialized philosophy, in the same way that I know analyzing political polls is a specialized thing, they're told you can do everything. You can be in charge of everyone. Engineers work for you, and I think in some sense, Dom got it, but because he's incompetent and he would not listen to people outside his clique, he did not realize it needs to promote the experts. That is, look at the highest levels of the highest layers of the civil service in Britain and the United States, short of the top layer. In the United States, the top layer is not actually civil servants like political appointees. In the United Kingdom, the top layer is people who are not political appointees but have a kind of Sir Humphrey from Yes Minister type identity as civil servants rather than as people within transport or education. So you could have someone from DFT, Department for Transport, spending a couple years there and then bouncing to education and back. There's no idea that if you are in education, it's because you are, let's say, a teacher, a career teacher, or a career professor, a career pedagogist, a career didacticist. And what you're going to do is, okay, maybe let's pretend that I did not wash out of academia. Let's also pretend that I was in Britain for some reason. Okay, let's pretend that I got a job as an academic in Britain. Um, yeah, the Netherlands has its own dysfunction. I was not aware of this. I was aware of other things like early commitment, but somehow the Netherlands being the worst in a way that's compatible with how Britain is the worst is not something that's going to surprise me. So my point is that let's say that I stayed in academia. Okay, I'm a math professor. Let's say I got hired in the zone, so 2014, and not when I had the high. I think my biggest near misses were actually 2014 in the zone and 2016 so above zone. But that's terrible. Yeah. And then I am a math professor, and yeah, maybe I can work. And something important that is also being done in Britain, and I do not know if the Netherlands, please let me know, not in the United States, is that is that there's a very open pipeline between academia and the civil service. So they might hire a professor. I think actually the Oakenshock Review is a good example. So they might hire a professor at in the relevant field who researches the topic to write an independent review. It's a very common thing in Italy, in Israel, I think here, and academic research on the subject will be listened to, and of course, much more prestige for engineers. The engineer is very prestigious in Southern Europe, as in Germany, much less so in Britain, and Cummings did not maybe realize that they need to, instead of have, again, let's say the person who's a math professor and then gets to, as a math professor, do math professor things and get accolades for, maybe if there's irrelevant, if it's applied and relevant to some issue, but if not, then to issues of math education. You absolutely ask professors what what is it like to teach students. What would you like students finishing secondary school to know when they get to your institution? And instead, like, the top levels rotate and between ministries, and this is a terrible thing because they kind of view themselves as people who only supervise and never do. And Dom specifically could not bring himself to do it. Like, I mean, someone with the same ego as Dom might, but not Dom, might have stumbled upon the correct solution, and Dom himself could not. And the reason Dom himself could not is that what he needed to tell himself, exactly, he needed to tell himself two things, really. First, I will listen to the civil servants, even though I am famous for one and only one thing, which is running the Leave campaign, and these people are all Remainers. They're experts on, I mean, the people voted Brexit, they did not vote on whatever is in my head right now about infrastructure or whatever. The second thing, Britain needs to look more like the continent. These are the words, okay? Britain needs to look like the continent. 7 words that are too different, that are too difficult for the British elite to get. Italy will learn from France and Germany. Spain will learn from France and Germany. Britain will not learn from France and Germany. And yes, France and Germany will not learn from each other very much, but they will learn from each other more than Britain will learn from both. And the problem is that this means that actually looking at success, at expert rule and how it interacts with democracy in Western Europe was beyond him, because Brexit is not just the idea that the EU is not what Britain should be doing. It's the idea that Britain is culturally apart from the continent. It's like an identity thing. It's an idea of British, and I know what you've said before, Born, is and you're right, it's more specifically English identity than British identity, let alone UK identity, which includes Northern Ireland or the Northern Irish voted Remain. And the upshot is that because of this identity issue, he was not capable of learning from his continental betters, and this is the problem with Britain. So a lot of it is governed by consultants, but can be resolved through promoting the civil servants below this rotating level by like letting the experts run things. So, for example, so here's a positive example of something Britain did. TfL hired a very successful transit manager to run TfL, namely Train Daddy, Andy Byford. He is, of course, British. He's not some kind of outside hire. He worked for TfL in a managerial capacity and then got farmed out to run Boston, not to run Boston, sorry, to run Toronto and New York, both very successfully. In fact, in New York, it was very famous for being so successful that the incompetent governor pushed him out. So obviously, yeah, he got the job he always wanted, a bigger transit agency than New York City Transit, in fact, TfL. This is something they did right, and this is something they should be doing in general for construction as well. Build an in-house civil service capacity. If you need some extra engineering help, yeah, sure, get ARIP, get ACOM, get PB, get WSP, but there should be a lot of in-house supervision, um, and um, and it should be people like the engineers should be not made to feel like they're always going to be the servants of the PPE grads from Oxford, if that makes sense. Um, and this is absolutely also an American problem, except sub PPE grad from Oxford for either someone who graduated Harvard, but that's usually in business or in law. Less so in politics. In politics, yeah, there's Harvard, Yale law people, but it's much more a matter of your name. Like it's like they don't even bother to do the George W. Bush thing of going to these unis and getting gentlemen's C. You just need to have the right name at this point, or just uh, or come from the specific political pipelines. Um, and yeah, so this means, first of all, respecting expert opinion, even if it is not your politics. It's a big problem for. Oh, Cummings is history, not PPE, but Boris is PPE, right? I mean, speaking to someone who kind of minored in history, and I say kind of because there's a specific paper, like, I took the correct courses for a minor in history. I did not do a certain piece of paperwork for reasons I don't want to get into. Um, but I mean, history is cool. It's just that it's a specialized topic, like philosophy, like anything really. Ah, yes. So the Netherlands started rotating because because the political appointees did not want to be Italy, and then did not ask themselves why, for the cost of 1 kilometer of the north-south line in Amsterdam, Milan builds 4 kilometers of subway. Yeah, all of that makes perfect sense right now. Yeah, yeah. You don't do this farming out system for civil servants ever. I mean, yeah, you can have the top job be limited, like a kind of a term limit, and then and like kind of have an up or out type system. But someone in transport stays in or around transport. Okay, you want to move them, it's maybe because maybe they've done a big infrastructure project, and they have done a successful reform in infrastructure construction that might make them a good fit for another ministry that deals with infrastructure construction. Maybe you're separating the infrastructure ministry from the transport ministry. This is sometimes a thing. And then you want to move from one to the other. Yeah, that's valid. Or if you're, let's say, I mean, I can see a universe in which a professor in a field who has achievements in both teaching and research can do work both in education and in the ministry relevant to their field. Let's say they're a nuclear physicist, then they can have one foot in education and one foot in energy and nuclear power plant regulation, but that's very unusual. And no, the UK does not do it for this reason because the UK is incredibly powerful, permanent secretaries. Yes, minister. Yes, minister is like the politics of yes, minister is public choice theory garbage, but the descriptions of the civil service are not wrong. They're very powerful, and much of it is due to a kind of solidarity among the civil servants. Like a lot of it comes from class solidarity among classes that are not Marxian classes, like the workers versus the capitalists. It can be something like tech founders or a class that had solidarity. Like the whole point of Silicon Valley is that you're loyal to the class, not to a specific company. So you absolutely bounce between companies. It's fine. Um, but yeah, no, you do not want to give the political appointees power because the political appointees understand nothing. What you want to have as few as possible. You want to have ministers. A minister is not a political appointee. A minister is an elected politician. A minister was elected, never directly, always indirectly, by the sovereign, aka the people, to represent them as, let's say, the person in charge of education or whatever. They have legitimacy to decide on big political topics. They want to decide whether to finally teach what exactly the Netherlands did to Indonesia as a matter of like historical accuracy and post-colonialism. Yeah, that's a political decision. Or you want to keep lying about how colonialism was hashtag actually good. That's a bad political decision, but that's a political decision. But or maybe very big decisions about a teaching method where the civil servants are at an impasse. Yeah, sure, but otherwise, no. Civil servants run things. Like the questions about basically all the questions about transportation that I'm talking about below the level of this should be funded are civil service level questions. Like the political input is okay. Tell me how much money goes to high speed rail, how much money goes to subways. If you have opinions about subways versus light rail, I will certainly listen. This is like roughly the level of political involvement in this that is fitting. And certainly not things like and certainly not things like trying to do a kind of local alliance where you're trying to buy off local power brokers for some kind of package like they do in California. And I worry possibly also in Berlin with the U8, with the lack of U8 extension, but separate topic. But certainly you don't let politicians dictate prioritization to you. Don't let politicians dictate engineering methods for you. You let politicians, again, that make very clear statements of priorities, and then the civil servants actually do things. And when you try to overempower the political appointees, I mean, Dutch costs suck, British costs suck, American costs suck worse. Like, it's entirely your call whether you want to be the sort of country that can get a kilometer of subway for $100 million or $150 million, or the kind that does this for $2 billion. Again, your call. Am I answering your questions? Like, I mean, all of this is a tangent. All of this is a 20-minute tangent, starting from when you're asking about what TFL should do. Also, can we have a conversation about why the Netherlands, of all places, where you guys somehow keep re-electing what is at this point probably Western Europe's worst leader, right? Kurz is out at this point, so when I say national level about gubernatorial, so bear in mind, so one of the weaknesses in what we're doing is we're not doing a case with none of our good cases is federal. Switzerland is very federal, but I do not know how it works. So it's not a matter of federalism being bad. I mean, federalism is bad, but you can have good infrastructure in a federal system. It's just the United States has this problem of kind of parallel government. It's not very good at deciding, and this is something that Canada, by the way, is much better at. Canada is good at deciding. Yeah, what do you mean? But yeah, most people are all right, so they don't care. Yeah, whatever. I mean, the Norwegians, for whatever reason, did manage to eat Solberg, even though she was all right on Corona. And by she, I mean the Norwegians, like the other Scandinavians, don't live with their parents, and they didn't do the boneheaded thing that Tegnell did, so they did okay. Nothing special, but anyway, yeah. So good gubernatorial case, I don't know very well because the American system does not have successes. There's no good governance in America, not at the political level. The politicians suck. And I can point out to you good politicians, and I can also point out to you that they are not being promoted. So the Gillibrands, so someone like Gillibrand or Tammy Duckworth would be made party leader and prime minister over here. And I suspect that at one point people did want to do it with Gillibrand. It's just that she fucked up. I mean, by which I mean she did something good. She said that the sexual assailant, uh, Al Franken, should resign. And then after he did resign, she became a convenient scapegoat. The fact that she had committed feminist political beliefs and her signature issue was fighting sexual assault in the U.S. military, which she managed to do very well at the legislative level. At actually, she had more successes inserting legislation on that through a Republican Senate and through the current Senate, where the chair of Armed Services, Jack Reed, is choking the bill for his own personal gratification. So a bunch of party elites, including George Soros, canceled Gillibrand, like the biggest cancel culture involving matters of sexual misconduct, has probably not been of any actual sexual predator, unless you count Franken himself, who was also viewed as a potential presidential runner, but of Gillibrand, who dared call it out. There were a bunch of people, and Source was among them, who would say, I will give a lot of money to whichever Democrat wins the primary, except Gillibrand. Pay attention to a billionaire would rather have Bernie Sanders than Kirsten Gillibrand. Um, okay, so yeah, the Netherlands also refuses to learn. That does not surprise me. Germany has that problem too. And when it does learn, it learns from Austria and Switzerland and not from countries that have better food, because countries that have better food are viewed as people who should always be our food service, who should always be our food service slaves rather than engineers. This is a big problem all over Northern Europe. It's just that I'm guessing it's just that Scandinavia blundered into something good, but don't worry, they'll fuck it up. Hey, NZL means north-south line, right? It's not something with Zeeland, right? It's a no, was it a Nord-Zuid lane? Also, I apologize in advance for my mangling of Dutch pronunciation. In my defense, your language is a nightmare to pronounce. Yeah, Nord-Zuid line. Yeah, not line. Yeah. So, are there any other questions, by the way? Oh, by the way, about so not quite federal, but in I just realized Sweden is very non-federal, but it has a lot of devolution and a lot of it's called subsidiarity there. So, for example, there is civil service at the county level, at the municipal level, but they bounce with. So there is actually a lot of transfer within the same expertise. So you can be working for the state, so Trafikverket, that's a state traffic administration. And then bounce between there and let's say uh, the county, so Stockholm County, the Stockholm's SL, it's called the Stockholm's Local Traffic, aka the civil service for transport within Stockholm County. Uh, so you absolutely can bounce between, like, within your broad topic, but between different levels of government. That is a thing that is done in Sweden. So Bernard, I hope that helps shed light on your question. Just because, but I mean, you're in Britain, right? And Britain is kind of hilariously unitary, and yes, they should be establishing better things for the Met counties, but also they should have an actually functioning uh, national level civil service, and it doesn't really matter if it's UK level or England. Like that's not the problem. Like the problem is not. I mean, yes, there are problems that are English identity driven in Britain. The fact that the civil service is run by an old boy network is a problem, but it is not. But I don't think it's an English ID problem, if that makes sense. Like I don't think that this is not something that I think Scotland does better. Yeah, yeah. I mean, because Scotland, yeah, Scotland has this thing. They pretend that they're Nordic, and then people who are actually Nordic go there and say "lol." Like, I mean, my suspicion is the only thing that's Nordic about Scotland is sexual assault rates, and that's because I'm pretty sure England and Wales have the same sexual assault rates as the Nordics as well. Like, it's a very Northern European problem, as far as I can tell. When it, for the record, is also far as I can tell missing from France. Like France's low sexual assault rates by German or British or Swedish standards. What am I doing? Better. Sure, no problem. Um, by the way, are there any other questions? If not, I can end this. Yeah, I have no idea. Actually, I'm interested in this question, Warner. Um, our local councils, or I don't know, or do Glasgow and Edinburgh have more power than the Met counties? Where the Met counties have this weird problem where Thatcher, I think it was Maggie who killed the Met county level of government instead of killing the sub Met county. Oh, okay, okay. So the issue is that with Scotland is it's still very unitary, but within Scotland, which I mean is fine. I mean, you don't want to do devolution to like the level of the burpclave because the burpclave is literally a burpclave. They can do devolution to the level of Scotland, like German state, Swedish county maybe because these are big. Like the entirety of the metropolitan area of Stockholm is Stockholm County. So Stockholm is kind of like I guess Met County scale. You can even devolve to Met counties. Met counties are probably the lowest level that I would feel comfortable seeing devolution to in Britain and I guess England. Um, Regions would be better, but we all know how that went. Thank you, Tony, for before there was Iraq. Your thing about doing Northeast England of all places. Yeah, but Tony Blair was the prime minister. Yeah, I know. I know that like this wasn't a Blair policy in the sense that Blair personally dragged Britain into Iraq, and had Brown somehow been PM, I doubt it would have happened. I mean, not. I mean, hard to tell, but that's at least my perception. Whereas probably all of the other shit that Blair did, like tuition fees and uh, probably would have happened either way, I think. Oh, the North. Yeah, no, no, that's what I meant. I mean, the Northeast referendum, like, right. But I'm saying that the person in charge of labor at the time was not Gordon Brown. I should go where? Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, fair. Are there, so I'm just going to do a last call for questions and see if anyone has any further question. Yeah, purely numerological, I want to cut this at 145 if there isn't a question, but numerology is a very powerful drug. Also, the fact that you said the one word finish helps me figure out the exact lag, so thank you. So anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in, and I will do this again in a week and pick a similar topic in public transport. So see you then, and goodbye.